This is the most unpatriotic, the most dishonest, the most dissembling, the most undeserving Prime Minister we have had in any of our lifetimes. Starmer would be out of office by the end of May. Isn't that worth fighting for? And the political life of the most unpopular and most useless Prime Minister in living memory is drawing to a close. Is he not the worst Prime Minister we've ever had in our lifetime?
Keir Starmer's political career is hanging by a thread as Nigel Farage vows to bring it crashing down. Starmer's premiership has been a disastrous mess, with shattered promises, failed policies, and a public rapidly losing trust as his incompetence plunges the country into turmoil. As Farage prepares for the final blow, it's clear Starmer's days in power are all but over.
That a dramatic political earthquake was about to happen, and the British people had voted against the main parties, against the trade unions, against the big businesses, against much of the media, and they voted to leave the European Union and done it decisively.
Let's start with the numbers, because numbers don't lie. Starmer's approval ratings have collapsed to levels that haven't been seen in modern British political history. Voters were promised a fresh start after years of conservative chaos. They were promised honesty, stability, and competent leadership. What they got instead was a man who changes his position depending on which way the wind is blowing. The British public gave Labour a historic majority, and Starmer has managed to squander that goodwill at a speed that genuinely shocks political analysts. People aren't just disappointed, they are angry, and angry voters don't forget.
It took the Conservatives 14 years, 14 long years of disaster to get into the mess they did, and this mob have managed it within a space of 18 months. I suppose you've got to admire it, really.
Inside the Labour Party itself, the mood is grim. Senior figures are no longer whispering behind closed doors. The conversations about replacing Starmer are getting louder, more open, and more serious. MPs who publicly defend him are privately questioning everything. His cautious, slow, reactive style was supposed to be a strength, a sign of maturity and discipline. Instead, it looks like paralysis. When crises hit and they keep hitting, Starmer responds with carefully worded statements that say absolutely nothing. The country is watching a man manage optics while actual problems spiral out of control.
They've sent to Westminster, since pretty much the end of World War I, this here will be a referendum on Keir Starmer's premiership of this country.
The broken promises are what really destroyed him with ordinary voters. Starmer built his entire identity around being the anti-Boris, a man of his word who respects the public's intelligence. That reputation is now completely shattered. On immigration, he promised action and delivered excuses. On foreign policy, his government executed embarrassing U-turns on military base agreements with the United States, creating confusion among allies and handing his opponents a gift. His political team responds to every criticism with spin, but British voters have developed an immunity to spin. They have seen too much of it. They know when they are being managed rather than led.
Do you think the public need to be ready for more tax rises if Labour fails to actually curb immigration, stop the boats, and fix our asylum crisis?
Yes, I think the public need to be prepared for more tax rises, but I think the public also might need to be prepared for an early general election. I struggle to see this lot going on to 2029. I believe there will be a fiscal event at some point in the next couple of years, and I think she'll face at some point.
The economy is where Starmer's government has done perhaps its most lasting damage. The grand vision of economic reform turned into one of the largest stealth tax operations in recent memory. Taxes went up, but growth did not follow. The promise was that investment would come flooding in, that businesses would be inspired by Labour's stability. Instead, confidence dropped. economic experts started issuing warnings almost immediately.
Connivance of the Labour and Conservative parties to deny council taxpayers the right to choose those people running their councils and directly taxing them. And I thought, enough. No taxation without representation.
The welfare bill is projected to cost an additional £27 billion by 2029, a figure that should make every working taxpayer furious. The minimum wage increases, sold as transformative policy, have done almost nothing to address youth unemployment. Young people in Britain are struggling, and the government's answer is more committee meetings and carefully worded reports.
A single naval vessel to Cyprus to defend an RAF base that is British sovereign territory. Mind you, you thought that was bad. The Defence Secretary, John Healey, doesn't even know how many ships we have in the Royal Navy.
Farage has spent decades being dismissed, mocked, written off, and declared finished. He is still here. And right now, he is not just surviving, he is thriving. The Reform Party's poll numbers are climbing week after week, and the reason is brutally simple. Every single policy area where Starmer is failing, Farage is offering the opposite. On immigration, where Starmer stumbles and hedges, Farage is direct and unrelenting. On economic policy, where Starmer raises taxes and hopes nobody notices, Farage is calling for cuts and accountability. On national security, where Starmer offers cautious diplomatic language, Farage demands action.
To allow nearly 200,000 undocumented young males into our country. And that is what has happened under both the Conservatives and Labour, and now more people have arrived by boat under Starmer than did under any other Prime Minister. Our borders are broken.
The immigration crisis deserves its own spotlight because it has become a defining failure of this government. Illegal channel crossings have hit record numbers under Starmer's watch. Thousands of undocumented individuals are crossing the water every month, and the government's response has been a string of announcements that produce no actual results. The Rwanda plan, whatever you thought of it, was at least an attempt at deterrence.
Keir Starmer, inaction man. A follower and not a leader. But none of them will do anything because they're hidebound to the European Convention on Human Rights, which our judges use to stop us deporting people.
Starmer scrapped it and replaced it with nothing of comparable weight. The public sees empty boats arriving, they see government ministers talking, and they see nothing change. Farage has turned this into his central campaign argument, and it is working. In working-class communities across the North and Midlands, areas that were once Labour heartlands, reform is the party people are talking about now.
So he has got no credibility within his own party, no credibility in the country, no proper standing now on the world stage. The bloke is a complete disaster, and the appointment of Peter Mandelson is just the straw that has broken the camel's back.
The national security picture is even more alarming. The terror attack in North London, linked to Iranian state-backed operatives, exposed something deeply troubling about how this government handles existential threats. Starmer's response was measured, diplomatic, and completely inadequate. When an IRGC-connected attack hits British soil, measured diplomacy is not leadership.
This is the man who will not stand up for British values. This is the man who will not prescribe the IRGC. And think about it, there's now an active terror cell in North London that attacked the Jewish community. It is directly linked to the IRGC, and all that Starmer says is we have sympathy, our thoughts and prayers are with the Jewish community. They don't want his thoughts and prayers, they want action from a decisive leader. They'll never get it from him.
The public expected the Prime Minister to stand at a podium and make absolutely clear that Britain will not tolerate state-sponsored terror on its streets. What they got was careful language designed to avoid offending anyone. The failure to formally prescribe the IRGC remains one of the most indefensible decisions of this administration. Iranian-backed networks are operating with relative freedom inside Britain, and the government's priority seems to be maintaining relationships with European partners rather than protecting its own citizens.
The voters in these areas can deliver a decisive blow, and a blow that would mean Starmer would be out of office by the end of May. Isn't that worth fighting for?
Britain's defense situation is genuinely frightening. The military has been underfunded, undermanned, and strategically neglected for years, but under Starmer, the situation has not improved. Modern warfare has moved at lightning speed. Drone technology, cyber capabilities, and electronic warfare are now central to how conflicts are fought. Britain's investment in these areas remains far behind adversaries and even some allies. When reform calls for a complete overhaul of defense spending, they are not just scoring political points, they are identifying a real vulnerability that Starmer's government refuses to address with any urgency.
If you want real change, if you want different people, if you want those with the courage who are prepared to stand up and put the interests of British people first, not international treaties or bogus organisations, if you want people who will make sure that it's British people that go to the top of social housing lists and not young men who've just arrived by boat.
What has happened to the traditional Labour voter is perhaps the most extraordinary political story here. The working-class communities of Northern England, Wales, and the Midlands built the Labour Party with their votes, their trade unions, and their loyalty. Those communities wanted a government that would fight for them on jobs, on cost of living, on community safety. What they received was a centrist administration that speaks in the language of progress while delivering very little of it. These voters do not feel represented. They feel abandoned. And when Farage stands up and speaks their language raw and unfiltered, they listen, not because they necessarily agree with everything he says, but because at least someone is saying something real.
We will control our borders. We will act in the national interest in terms of defence, in terms of waking up to the fact that our defences were shredded in 14 years of Conservative government, and despite all of Labour's promises, it isn't actually happening.
Farage's promise to end Starmer's career isn't just talk, it's a calculated strategy gaining real momentum, funding, and public support. Reform is no longer a protest movement, it's a rising political force, recruiting candidates and targeting key seats with serious intent. Starmer came to power with the weight of public hope, but in just 14 months that hope has turned to frustration, and now it's hardening into permanent disillusionment. Farage is betting that Starmer can't recover, and right now that's looking like a very smart bet.